Good morning. Dzień dobry. Nazywam się John Wolf. And raise your hand if you live in Poznan. Yeah, quite a few people. I live in Wrocław, so I came here today by limousine. Is limuzina in Polish? Limuzina? Mój limuzina ma imię, się nazywa PKP. Jest bardzo ekskluzywne. But this is my second or third time in Poznan. And the last time I was here was about 5 or 6 years ago, and the train station looks a little different. There's a huge shopping center. When was that shopping center built? Five years ago? Six years ago? So maybe I was here 7 or 8 years ago even. Anyways, it's my second or third time here. And today we're here to talk about the 8th grade exam, of course. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my teaching history and my past. Originally, I'm from San Diego, California, and I moved to Poland, to Opole, in 2006. And I started teaching in a private language school, which was a really nice experience. Does anybody here work in a private language school? Yeah, a few people? Okay. And I was very lucky to work in a private language school that had a very good teacher training program. And from Opole, I moved to Wrocław, working for the same family of schools, which also had a good training program. I taught a lot of younger learners. I became a younger learner expert, I guess, which basically meant that my boss gave me all the kids' classes to teach, which was an interesting experience. I remember my first kids' class in Opole. I had a group of 4 6, 7-year-olds, and I was terrified. I walked in the room, I said, "Good morning," and they said, "Good morning, teacher," and I just thought, oh my God, what am I gonna do? But that was quite a long time ago. And I've taught younger learners, adults, exam English, general English, business English. I was a Cambridge examiner for a few years. I was a Cambridge younger learner examiner for a few years. And I've picked up a lot of nice exam tips and strategies, which I'd like to share with you. Today. So I think that's probably enough about me. So as I mentioned before, I'm from. That's enough about me. One more thing. I'm from California, and of course, in the States, we also have standardized testing, right? Of course, from primary school all the way through secondary school, every 2, 3, or 4 years, depending on the state, there's some kind of standardized test. And personally, I'm not a huge fan of standardized testing. And there's a few reasons. Can we switch to the presentation for a moment? Oh, fantastic. So there's a few problems with standardized tests. Here's a few of the problems. And I think the last one might be the reason for the others, right? There can be some pretty heavy consequences for these exams, which causes students pressure, and it can put some pressure on teachers as well. I always feel a little bit responsible for my students' success or failure on exams. When it comes down to it, it's up to the students, but of course we can do as much as we can in the classroom to get them ready for these exams. And the first point there, fear of the unknown. We can never predict exactly what will be on a test. We can prepare students for the types of activities they'll see. We can do lots of exam practice, but we never know exactly what will be there. So hopefully we've got some tips, some different areas to focus on to avoid some of those difficulties with exams. And these are 3 of the areas that we're going to focus on today. And we're going to look at some activities and some approaches that begin with training in September and get students ready to take the exam in the spring. So of course we'll be looking at receptive and productive skills development. We'll look at some activities for expanding students' range of vocabulary and grammar. Excuse me. We'll also look at some exam practice ideas, and we'll look at a couple different strategies for exams as well. So the 8th grade exam, I've prepared a little quiz for you. Since we're here to talk about a test, let's have a little test. And for this quiz, it's a quiz to see how much you know or how much you remember about the 8th grade exam. And for the quiz, you'll need to work with a friend, or if you haven't got a friend, you can make a new friend. So please find somebody next to you, in front of you, or behind you that you can speak with. And we're going to have quite a few activities that we'll do. So throughout both workshops today, I'll be asking you to talk with one or two people. So this quiz, the quiz is a true-false quiz, okay? I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes to work on it. If the answer is false, please discuss what the correct answer should be, okay? So 2 or 3 minutes with the partner. Here is the exam quiz. Okay, shall we check? Let's check. Hello, 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 hello. Let's check. So number 1, true or false? True. Yes, true. Those are the 5 sections. In our first workshop today, we will cover receptive skills, and after the coffee break, we'll focus more on productive skills. Just a quick note about the timing. We might go a little bit over schedule in the first workshop, but the second workshop we might be a little bit under schedule, so we should still be out of here at the correct time. Okay. Number 2, true or false? True. Very good. Yes, very good. Number 3, yes, 90 minutes. Quite good news. 90 minutes is manageable. There's other standardized tests that can last 3-4 hours. Has anybody ever taken quite a long standardized test, maybe at university or before? Yeah, 90 minutes to me, that's quite good news. It's a manageable amount of time. Number 4? Fantastic. How many? Perfect. And number 5? What's the correct answer? Everybody passes, yeah, which is also quite good news, right? And number 6, also false. They vary slightly, and as we go through each section of the exam, we'll talk about the weight of each paper. Now, something that I like to do with training sessions and also with teaching, I try to predict some problems that people might have. Some likely difficulties on the exam. There's a few areas. First of all, understanding what the question is asking in the productive sections of the exam could be difficult for learners, especially in writing. Finding the right content area to focus on could be a little bit challenging. And of course, listening, right? Listening for specific information always presents some difficulties. And we'll look at some different ways to help learners with listening and develop their confidence in listening as well. Open tasks in general, especially knowledge of language functions and use of English, can be quite challenging. And using a range of grammar and vocabulary, we'll also look at some ways we can help prepare learners and get better at using diversified language means throughout the course of the year. And finally, these mediation skills, translating. Some parts of the exam require translation, and we'll look at some ways to deal with this mediation on the exam as well. So 5 parts to the exam. As I mentioned before, we're looking at these 3 sections in the first workshop today. So let's get started with reading comprehension. And there's an overview of the reading paper. So we'll look at both the closed and open tasks in reading. The score share, does anybody know the score share for reading? What percentage? 25 to 30, which is quite good news. In my experience, students have, they get a lot of experience, they get a lot of training, they get a lot of practice reading in class and out of class through different means. And one area of reading that's often overlooked, and one thing I like to get my students to do, is to read the whole text before they answer the questions. So one way to do that is to give them some kind of gist task. And a nice way to give them a gist task is with a picture. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I want to see if you can predict what the text will be about based on the picture. So as soon as you know, you can just shout it out, okay? Slowly revealing the picture here. Phones, technology. Wait for it, wait for it. Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, what's this guy's name? Wow, you guys can say the name better than I can. He's got the weirdest name ever. But the text is about Sherlock Holmes. Have you guys seen this TV series, Sherlock? Yeah, a few people. I liked it. I liked how they deal with the text messages. They kind of put the text messages up on screen for the viewers to read. It's a nice. They have a nice approach to technology in the series. So showing students a picture and then reading the whole text to check and see if that is in fact what the text is about. And then what I often do is, if there's an exam practice task, I just ask my students, okay, you've read the text once, now do the questions, do the task, right? Just do it. And on multiple choice, it can look something like this. Now, the strategy training comes in after they've done the task, when checking answers. And if we focus on one of these questions and one portion of the text, what I ask my students to do is, of course, to find the right answer, but then when we're checking answers, they have to point out the specific portion of the text that gave them the answer. They have to underline it or circle it. So if we know C is the correct answer here, we can find a connection to the text here. So we're linking new ways of solving crimes with his job has become very different. So asking students to find these lexical links between their answer and the text. And I think it's worth pointing out that we don't have the same words. We have 2 expressions with a similar meaning. What's that called when you have 2 words or 2 expressions with a similar? Synonyms. Yeah, exactly, synonyms. Some exam books use the phrase parallel expressions or parallel phrases, but essentially what we're asking students to do here is find synonyms. And what else do we often get on a multiple choice exam task besides the correct answer? There's a special type of wrong answer, isn't there? What is it called? Yeah, distractors, exactly. I also like to ask my students to find the distractor. So the distractor here, and in the text, we can see the exact same words. So I like to point out to students, the correct answer often has different words, And the distractor will often use the same exact language. Or if it's a verb, maybe a different verb form, for example. And one trick that I like to use, which I learned from one of my math teachers in high school, is to give students points. So maybe 1 point for the correct answer, and then maybe 2 or even 3 points for finding the right reason why, the right part of the text that gave them the answer. So we can kind of reward students for using and practicing this strategy, and maybe an extra point for finding the distractor. Let's look at another example. And if we're looking at this solving problems, finding clues, what could be some synonyms for either solving problems or finding clues? Any ideas what we might see in the text? Let's take a look. We can find some synonyms here. And we've got this, notice little things, right? Finding clues, noticing little things. And just like before, we've got a distractor as well in speak and spoke. So finding lexical links between the answer and the text, and also identifying the distractor. This is one strategy to use after students have done the task. Let's take a look now at an open task, an open reading task. And actually, the strategy works in a very similar way. This is an exam task from Repetitorium, and they're noted with this red circled check mark. So after students read the entire text, we can give them the task, a question that looks something like this. And for the open task, we can use the same strategy as multiple choice, but now we're finding links between the question and the text instead of the answers and the text. And we can see here in this portion of the text, we can find a lexical link anywhere and everywhere, right? Anywhere and everywhere. That's the link in this case. Here we've got improve is our keyword. What are some synonyms for improve? Get better. Okay. In the text, we've got make stronger, right? We've got make stronger. So it's a similar strategy as multiple choice, but a tiny bit different because the links are in the question, not in the answers. And we can expand and practice this. We can practice synonyms, but of course we can practice antonyms as well. And I've got a little task for you. I'm going to describe 8 words to you using either synonyms or antonyms, and I want you to write down the word that I'm describing. Okay, there's 8 words. So write down the word that I'm describing. Number one is the opposite of warm. The opposite of warm. Number 2 is the opposite of boring. The opposite of boring. Number 3 is a synonym for automobile. A synonym for automobile. Number 4 is the opposite of often. The opposite of often. Number 5 is an adverb, which is a synonym for not long ago. A synonym for not long ago. Number 6 is the opposite of forget. The opposite of forget. Number 7 is a synonym for leave in terms of a train or a plane or a bus. And number 8 is the opposite of sell. The opposite of sell, the verb to sell. Take a quick look and see if your partners have the same list. Okay, and here are the answers. Here are your answers. Now, this activity can be conducted by us, by the teacher, but of course it can also be made more student-centered. How could we make this activity much more student-centered? We can get the students to do it, right? How many of you work with vocabulary lists of some kind? Anybody work with vocab lists? We've seen vocab lists in course books as well, and if you have a big long vocab list, one way to make this activity more student-centered is ask each student to choose 5 or 6 words, and in pairs they describe the word to their partner using a synonym or an antonym. So doing it the same way, but led by students instead of led by the teacher. Now, the reading matching section works kind of like multiple choice, but not exactly. You have some questions and then 3 texts which are a similar genre on a similar topic, and students have to match the text to the question. And guess what? We can use the same strategy once again on this matching section, and it looks something like this. So we have which text describes a place in a peaceful area, our keywords here. Now, I'd like you to focus on these portions of the text. And if we look at, for example, near the city center is a synonym for which part of the question? In the heart of the city. Right, so we've got synonyms again, but we can look here at park and overlooks the river, and this kind of relates to peaceful area, but it's not exactly a synonym. It's more like peaceful area is the category, and a park and overlooks the river is like an example of the category. So we don't have to only focus on lexical relationships in terms of synonyms, but we can also look at superordinates and hyponyms, or a category with a few examples. Let's look at another example. We've got the keywords cook at home. What's some language related to cook at home? Some examples of cooking at home. Kitchen, yes, yeah, prepare food, kitchen. Here's the text, and what we have are these. So cook at home is our category, and we have a few examples in the text. So we're looking at a different type of lexical link. The strategy is still the same, but we're not only limited to synonyms, but also these superordinates with hyponyms. And there's a fun game that I like to play with my students, which practices these categories with examples. And it's a game, it's called a categories race, and it's very similar to Państwo Miasta. You guys know Państwo Miasta? The big difference is the categories are not city, country, river, but the categories are whatever we want the categories to be, right? Let's play one round. So find a partner. Groups of 2 or 3 are fine. Here's your categories. And your goal is to find a different answer for each category, but it has to begin with one letter of the alphabet, with the same letter of the alphabet. So you're looking for a different example in each category that begins with the letter S. Okay, begins with the letter S. Anybody finished? It's a race, so when you're done, raise your hand. Aha, okay, okay. Okay, thank you very much. Now, thank you very much. In class, I know it's a fun game, Sorry to stop you. So some examples, something you do at the seaside. Very good. In the winter. Fantastic. On your own. Okay, and at school. So I heard somebody say sleep. Who said sleep? Hopefully not at school. Maybe on your own. So again, this activity is a race. You've got to find a way to assign points in different ways. And it's a nice way to practice a category with some examples. And one way to make it slightly more student-centered, I like to get students to choose the categories, if possible, right? If possible. So just to kind of recap the reading strategies, we talked about these lexical links in terms of synonyms and categories with examples. The first idea we looked at was giving students a gist task so they read the entire text before they start reading for specific information. And the last thing, which I haven't mentioned yet, is to encourage students to guess, right? A blank answer is definitely wrong, but if they can guess, they really should, especially with multiple choice, right? Especially with multiple choice. If you've got 3 answers, A, B, or C, what could we encourage students to do to improve their odds a little bit? If they're sure one answer is wrong, cross it out, then it's 50-50, right? I like those odds. I like those odds. So I always encourage students, if you don't know, guess, okay? Just, even if you have no idea, put a guess out there because the blank answer is definitely wrong. Okay, let's switch over to listening now. And the reading and listening skills are similar, but they're also quite different in a lot of ways. The listening paper looks something like this. So we're still looking at closed tasks and open tasks. It's got a slightly lower score share than reading, which might be good news depending on the student. And listening is not the same as reading. And one way that it's massively different is it tends to be a really stressful kind of activity, especially on exams, right? Especially on exams. There's a few reasons why. Here's a few of them. On an exam or on a listening activity, you can't ask the CD player to repeat itself. In real life, if you miss something, you can say, "Excuse me, can you please repeat that?" Which is a phrase I use a lot in Polish. Poproszę jeszcze raz. Nie rozumiem. Proszę mówić do mnie jak dziecko. That one I don't use too often, but sometimes when I ask people to repeat themselves, I get a louder version of the same thing. So then I have to say, I need different words because louder doesn't really make me understand. Speed and pace can be an issue with recordings as well. Background noise, I mean, we have some control over background noise in our classes. We can try to control the noise level in classes during a listening. And of course, the lack of visual clues, right? These paralinguistic clues, body language that we get when you're speaking with someone face to face, body language really helps convey meaning. Have you guys ever used a foreign language on the phone? Yeah, not so easy. The only thing you have is what you hear, right? It can be quite challenging. So helping learners throughout the course of a school year to develop listening skills, in my experience, confidence building is a big part of that. There's a few different ways we can help students build confidence, and building confidence means students are confident that they know what they heard, that they don't constantly second-guess themselves. One way to do that is with an effective receptive skills procedure. So gist task first, and then a detailed task, like with the reading paper. Another thing we can do is pause the recording during some kind of activity. Pause the recording during a gist activity? No, just listen to the whole thing for general information, and then possibly pause when checking answers or during a detailed listen. And something else we can do is allow students to control the recording, which might sound a little bit strange, but I'd like to show you one slightly chaotic but very fun way of doing that. And the first thing we need is we have to clarify with students that they know the language for all of these buttons. because the activity is called Teacher as a CD player, but when I learned it, it was called Teacher as a tape recorder. Does anybody have tape recorders or cassette tape players in their classroom still? Yeah, they're still out there, right? They're still out there. Make sure you get that tape ready before your lesson, right? Otherwise, you're like fast forwarding and rewinding the whole time. So the green button there is blue button, fast forward, yellow button, rewind or go back. Yeah, let's use rewind. Then we have pause and stop. So the way this activity works, it's a dictation activity. And we're going to do the activity. So I'll read a text to you, and I'm going to read it at natural speed, okay? And your goal, what you have to do is write down everything you hear. Okay, you've got to write down everything you hear. Now, if you get behind, you can say pause, rewind to the beginning, or pause, rewind to the word city, for example, and then I'll go back to the word or forwards. Okay, let's try it. Let's try it and see how it goes. Are you ready? Get your wrists all stretched out. When I was about 9 years old, I used to go to the cinema. Every Saturday morning. After the film had finished, I would go to a toy shop and look at model planes and trains. Cinema every Saturday morning. I used to go to the cinema every Saturday morning. After the film had finished, I would go to a... When I was about 9 years old, I used to go to the cinema every Saturday morning. Okay, I think you get the idea, right? I think you get the idea. Okay, good. Now, I'm a big fan of dictation activities. They're a little bit old-fashioned, but I think they can be quite effective. And when students get to control the recording, it gives them a chance to work more at their own pace, and it's also a little bit of fun, right? Which might make the activity more memorable for students. Also, in building confidence, using peer support, pair checking. I often ask students before they have to give me an answer, they check with their partner to see if they have the same answer. And when it comes to listening, doing short exercises often. I don't like to overload my students with a long kind of listening activity. They probably listen to me enough as it is. And of course, to bring in the visual, right? To bring in the DVD when possible. And we can see a video lesson from English class. The topic is moving house. Has anybody moved house recently? No? Yeah? Okay, a couple people? Yeah. The topic is moving house. And we're going to watch a video about moving house in a moment. And of course, with these DVD lessons, there's tasks as well. This is the task that goes with the video. And when we have open questions like this, we can ask students to identify and underline the keywords, right? The keywords in the question. In number 1, which word or words should students underline? Possibly just where, right? Maybe where live, right? Number 2, easy or difficult. Number 3, why, fantastic. Number 4, how long? Yeah, how long? And it can be quite challenging for students and for us as well to listen and read at the same time. So the idea is to underline key words so when students are listening, they can focus just on 1 or 2 words instead of trying to read the whole question as they listen. Are you ready for the task? Let's watch the video and see if you can get the answer to those 4 questions, okay?
It is winter. We are far above the Arctic Circle, and this is a typical Dolgan village. It is home to just 2 extended families. These people, who are originally from Central Asia, came here during the 18th century to look after reindeer. Here, in the coldest part of the Arctic, life is very hard. The only way to get water for 9 months of the year is to melt ice from the frozen rivers. Outside, it is absolutely freezing, with temperatures in the winter as low as -40 degrees Celsius. Survival is only possible because of reindeer fur, which makes very warm clothing. This warm clothing is especially important for the children. But the Dolgen even use reindeer fur to insulate their huts as well. Community is very important to the Dolgen.
I think you get the idea. Did he say -40? -40! Oh my gosh, it doesn't get that cold in California, I promise. It does not get to -40. Wow. I think the coldest weather I've experienced, I live in Wrocław, which is a bit warmer compared to other parts of Poland, I guess. I think the coldest we've had is maybe -25, maybe -20, -25. Does it get very cold in winter in Poznan? Like in Wrocław, okay. Well, -20 is cold enough, really. So where do they live? Do you remember where they? Okay, and is it an easy or difficult life? Difficult life, especially if you don't like fish, then it's very difficult. Why do they move house? I don't know if we got that far. Did we get that far? We didn't. Okay. But I think you get the idea. So keywords, it minimizes how much reading students have to do as they're listening. Now, with multiple choice listening, it looks something like this. And multiple choice listening, we're basically looking at a similar strategy again to reading. So we're going to do a listening task, and what you have to do is listen for the correct answer and also see if you can find the link between the answer and the recording. So we're still looking for those lexical links. Let's do one example.
Oh, hi, Sophie. Hey, did you watch that documentary last night? The one about body language? It was really interesting.
Oh, right. Yes, I saw it was on, but I was too busy with my maths homework. What did you learn?
Okay, let's see if I can remember. Right, here's one. If you cross your arms in front of your chest, it means you're not very friendly.
Really? Is that really true?
Well, it could also mean you're cold, I suppose.
What else?
Biting your nails means you're stressed. Well, we knew that already. Oh, yes. If someone blinks a lot, they could be lying.
Or there's something in their eye, of course.
True.
Okay, give me one to guess.
Right.
Okay. Answer? Fantastic. And the connection is maths homework. Now, if you think back to those lexical links that we talked about, we had synonyms and we had categories with examples. Studying and maths homework, probably more like categories and examples, right? How about a distractor? B and C were both mentioned, and in this portion of the text, we had body language as a distractor, right? But watching TV was also mentioned. So we have a similar strategy in listening, which is quite good news for students. They don't have so many strategies they have to remember when it comes to exam time. Another thing I like to do is getting students to think a little bit like examiners. And one way to do that is to ask them to create a task that they'll see on the exam. And they don't have to create the entire task. That would be possibly a little bit too challenging. But we could ask them to create part of the task. For example, with multiple choice, we can give students a tape script before they listen, and they have to think of the 3 possible answers. So not only are we asking them to find the correct answer, but also thinking about incorrect answers and maybe a distractor as well. And I've found that students get a lot more motivated by finding a good distractor than finding the correct answer. They like to try and kind of trick their classmates. So if we look at this portion of text, here's 3 possibilities. right? 3 possibilities. So it shows students what an exam task looks like, but also gets them kind of interacting with the task by trying to think of these multiple choice answers. Now, when it comes to opening tasks, there's a slightly, open listening tasks. There's a slightly different strategy that we can use here. And the strategy, it's all about prediction, right? And prediction is used with gist tasks at times, but we can also use it with detailed tasks. And I've had some mixed reactions from students when I asked them to predict something. I had one student, he was a teenager, quite a high-level teenager, and he said, "John, I don't like to make predictions. I don't like to predict. I like to know and then say it." And I thought, okay, great, but what if you don't know? Predicting can help you figure something out, right? It can help you on your way to knowing. So an open task looks something like this. And we can ask students to predict the type of information that goes in the gap. They can't possibly predict the exact answer that will be there, but we can ask them about the type of information. For example, with number 1, the museum has been open for a number of years, or they're listening for a period of time, right? Some kind of period of time. Work with your partners, please, for a couple of minutes. See if you can predict what type of information is required in the rest of those gaps. Okay, here's some possibilities. Contents or some kind of collection, maybe. Number 3. Yeah, website, maybe an information desk or something. Number 4, part of the city, a district, maybe, something like that. Again, the idea is on a listening, on the exam, they have a little bit of time to read the task, right, before they have to listen. So this is one way to direct their attention. What should they be doing while they're reading? They can just read it, which is okay, but this prediction activity can be quite useful when they actually have to listen. So it's kind of a more profitable use of that little bit of time they get to prepare for this listening task. So let's listen and check and see how close our predictions were, okay?
Hello and welcome to the Crime Museum. As you know, we only opened 3 weeks ago on the 1st of October, but we've had 2,000 visitors since then. Everyone wants to see the exhibits from some of the most horrible crimes in the 20th century. The police have wanted to open an exhibition for a long time, but we have to thank Professor Green from London University for finally putting this collection together. He continued work that was started by his colleague Janet Potter, who unfortunately died last year. There are 3 main rooms with exhibits, and you can get a detailed guide from the information table on my left.
Okay, I think we get the idea. Number one, what was the answer? Do you remember? 3 weeks. So very good prediction in that case. Number two, it was collection. Number three, information table. Right. So in number three, okay, we didn't make a perfect prediction, but that's not exactly the point, right? The idea is to narrow students' focus a bit, so they're looking for a kind of type of information instead of, just listening for some kind of information, right? So the listening strategies that we talked about, again, lexical links, right? Still the same as in the reading paper. Still being aware of distractors as in reading, but also this idea of prediction and making useful predictions to narrow their focus when listening for specific information. And again, same as in reading, if you don't know, guess, right? Okay, moving on to use of English. This paper can be possibly one of the more difficult ones. Of course, it depends on the student, right? It looks something like this. The closed tasks are tasks that we're familiar with. Some of the open tasks might be new for some of us, and we'll look at a few of those open tasks. And the score share here is 25 to 30%. So the use of English paper tests students' awareness of grammatical structures and, of course, vocabulary. And one way to develop those areas, we can use a text. This is our Sherlock text. And one way to develop students' awareness of structures and vocabulary is by asking them to identify collocations. And I know there's lots of different types of collocations. For right now, when I say collocation, I mean 2 or more words that match, right? A group of words that goes together. So in a text like this, there's an activity called mining a text, and we can ask students to identify collocations in a text. So I'll give you about 30 seconds. Have a look at the text and see how many collocations you can find. I'll give you a hint, there's a lot. Okay, time's up. Here's some examples. I think there's maybe 15 or 16 here. So mining a text can be done in this way. How many collocations can you spot? It might be useful to focus students' attention a bit more. And one way of doing that is to provide definitions and ask them to find a specific collocation. So kind of like a vocabulary hunt, but instead of looking for an individual word, they're looking for a collocation, right? A small group of words. Let's take a look at gap-filling tasks in use of English. And these gap-filling tasks test students' knowledge of different types of words. And if we look at the multiple choice options here, what types of words do we have? Are they more like grammar words or more like content words? Well, we've got quite a lot of prepositions, linkers. They're a bit more like grammar words. And this is one area that use of English tests, is students' knowledge of grammar words and how they're used with content words. If we look at one example here, very good, yes, it's on. And what I encourage my students to do is to look before and after the gap, right? We're still looking at a collocation. Before the gap, we have soon, which is not a lot of help. But after the gap, we have a specific date. And we know that it should be on, right? On a specific date. If it was a month, in day of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, on again, okay. A year, in, and then if it was a time, at. Okay. I had a really funny experience with a group of teenagers. we were kind of talking, and I asked them, I said, what are your plans? What are you doing on the weekend? And one of the students said, John, I think it's at the weekend. And I said, well, I'm pretty sure it's on the weekend. You know, I know what I'm talking about. And he said, John, but I've seen it in a book. It's in a book. I'm really positive it's at the weekend. And I thought, it was in a book? And this was when I first started teaching English in Europe. And as you know, Europe is basically British English. So after class, I told my students, okay, let me talk with some of my colleagues, and I'll get back to you next lesson. So I asked one of my English colleagues, and I said, hey, do you say at the weekend or on the weekend? And he said, at the weekend, of course. I said, yeah, okay. So I was kind of corrected by a student. It was a little bit embarrassing, but both are okay. Remember, between British English and American English is better, okay? Just remember that. American English is better. Okay, so again, looking at what's before and what's after the gap to find some help with a collocation. And we were talking before in listening about prediction, and predicting, even with use of English, in a multiple choice close can be quite useful. So before students look at the possible answers, getting them to predict or try and guess what the answer might be can also be quite useful. In this case, keen on, right? Keen on. Yeah. So we get clues in the form of these easily confused words. Grammar words, here's some examples of different types of grammar words, which can be tricky areas, especially prepositions. I struggle with prepositions in Polish as well. Now, when it comes to a matching task, we're not only looking, of course, at grammar words. We also, unfortunately, have to focus on content words as well. If we look at this type of task, we've got verbs here, and students have to match them. So it's not exactly multiple choice. It's kind of like a multiple choice task. It's like a multiple choice kind of puzzle, I suppose. So the use of English paper doesn't only test students' knowledge of grammar words, but of course, content words as well. We can use prediction here, but also I would still encourage my students to look at what's before and what's after the gap. They've got to choose the correct verb, but also a verb that's followed by an infinitive form. So it's testing students' awareness of verb patterns here. And in this case, it's decided. So I've got a little activity that I'd like to show you to help develop students' awareness of collocations. And it works quite well with the mining activity we looked at in the Sherlock text. I'm going to give you a list of some words and phrases, and you've got to think of nouns that collocate with the expressions that I'm going to stick up on the board in a moment. So what noun collocates with demand? Going after demand. Okay, how about justify your? Okay, course of. Now, what if I told you it was the same noun that collocates with all of these phrases? Any idea? Just take 30 seconds with your partner. Which one noun collocates with all these phrases? Okay, there it is. Yeah. Action. Yeah, action. So this type of activity can be used to practice collocations that students already know, but also to introduce new collocations into their vocabularies. Now, we had this teacher as a tape recorder activity before, and as I mentioned, I'm a big fan of dictation activities. And I'd like to show you another dictation activity which practices writing, listening, speaking, reading, basically everything. I'm going to read a text to you, and you have to write down everything you hear. But this time, you can't stop me. Okay? Oh my gosh. You can't stop me this time. Let me find my text. Okay. I'm going to read one sentence. It's quite a long sentence, but it's only one sentence. You have to write down everything you hear, but you won't be able to unless you're an ultra-fast writer. So if you can't write everything, should you focus more on content words or more on grammar words? Content words. Yeah, focus more on content words. I'll read the sentence twice, and then you'll have a few minutes to check with the partners around you. And your goal is to reconstruct the sentence in its original form. So I'll read it twice, then you can check with the people around you, and I'll read it again. Are you ready? Dictogloss is a technique that is used to practice grammatical structures in which students form small groups and summarize a target language text. Okay, once again. Yes. Dictogloss is a technique that is used to practice grammatical structures in which students form small groups and summarize a target language text. Okay, check with 2 or 3 people around you and see if you can fill in some of the gaps. Okay. It's nice, a nice way to write it with gaps like that. Okay. Nothing. Okay. You've got the first word, right? Okay. One more time. Dictogloss is a technique that is used to practice grammatical structures in which students form small groups and summarize a target language text. Got it? Okay, let me show you the original version and you can check what you've got. It was just the first sentence, and this text is a description of how to use a dictogloss and what it's for. So as teachers, it's up to us how many times to read the text, how many chances we give students to confer with their colleagues, but it really gets them thinking about how language fits together. And it also practices, as I mentioned, first they're listening and they're writing. When they're conferring with colleagues, they're speaking. And in the end, when they check, they're reading. Okay, so just to summarize, the use of English strategies, familiarizing learners with collocations and all different types of collocations, which encourages them, this dictogloss activity encourages them to think more about language structure and how to fill the grammar words into those gaps. The materials from the session today, from the first workshop, were taken from these 2 courses, which provide plenty of practice with language systems and skills, exam strategies and exam practice. And remember, preparation is everything, so get a good night's sleep, eat a healthy breakfast, and practice.